So first off, does any racism exist in America? Not systemic racism, we'll get to that in a sec, but what racism is real right
We
now?
live in a country that's got 330 million people. Roughly 8 to 10% of them believe Elvis is still alive. Almost half of them believe if you send Elvis a letter, he'll get it. Obviously, there's racism. There are individuals who don't like other people because of their race. No question about it. But are there corporations that have a policy of not hiring anybody? Are there governmental agencies that have a policy of not hiring anybody? The answer is no. If you can tell me the company, IBM, Apple, that has a policy of not hiring black people, tell me, or brown people, tell me who that company is, and we can deal with it. I don't know what people mean when they talk about institutional racism. If this were the 50s, I would know what you're talking about. When there was segregation that was legal segregation in the South, where you couldn't marry somebody outside your race in certain states. But that is no longer the case right now. The racism that people talk about right now, in my opinion, is individual stuff, where some individual doesn't like you, or some individuals don't like you. But is it something that is anything akin to what we experienced in the 50s and the 60s? Absolutely not. And I think it's insulting to people who have fought hard and died in the 50s and the 60s to get us to this point, to act like things are just the same.
Yeah.
When you have people like Eric Holder saying, as he did when he was AG, we now have pernicious racism, which he said was every bit as bad as the old racism. What the hell are you talking about? I mean, it's insulting to me.
So what do you do to defeat that idea? So again, this is, you mentioned that in our conversation, and it really did, you got me. I said something, well, there's systemic racism. And you said, well, what companies can I
just asked you for an example.
Yeah, you got me. And so I do agree with you. There are racist people. There are a certain amount of people that don't like black people, that don't like Jews, that don't like gays, etc. We live in a free country. You're allowed to not like people.
That's
It
right.
may be odious and unpleasant, but you're allowed to. You can't harm them, but...
Correct.
But what do you do to stop the idea of what you're talking about, that things have changed for the better and that there's a certain amount of people that want that oppression, that want the oppression because it sort of puts them above other people? How do you fight that? You've been trying to fight it, I think, for a long time.
Tell the truth. That's how you fight it. Tell the truth. I mean, this movement called Black Lives Matter, I think we talked about that a little bit. It's as bogus and as phony a movement as the notion that O.J. Simpson is innocent from having killed 2 people. It's a fraud. Most cops simply want to do a good job and come home. Most cops, frankly, are more hesitant to pull the trigger against a black suspect than a white suspect. There have been a couple of studies that have shown that recently. One of them was an economist from Harvard named Roland Fryer. And he is apparently the youngest tenured professor in the history of Harvard. And he's a tenured professor in the Department of Economics. And he did a study to find out about police brutality. He assumed he would find the opposite. And he was shocked, he said, when he found out that most police officers are more reluctant to use deadly force on a black suspect than a non-black suspect. And the reason, in my opinion, is pretty obvious. If you shoot a black person and there's any question whatsoever about it, you're going to be under the gun. You're going to be possibly prosecuted, maybe lose your pension, maybe go to jail. Cops are deathly afraid of being perceived as engaging in racial profiling. There was a recent poll that just came out, and it turns out 75% of cops said that they are more reluctant now to engage with citizens than before the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah. So what's the disconnect then? When you see these cities, when you see Atlanta and you see Chicago and you see Ferguson and all of these places that are usually under Democratic control, they usually have Democratic mayors.
Right.
The groupthink would tell you, wait a minute, Democrats are helping black people. So where is the disconnect coming from?
A lot of people are not thinking critically, Dave. They're just not. Take Baltimore. Baltimore was run by a black mayor. She got 85% of the vote. What kind of politician gets 85% of the vote?
Yeah, I think Gaddafi got 85%.
I think Stalin got 105%.
Yeah.
And the top 2 officials running the police department were black. The command staff, majority black. All the city council is Democrat, majority black. The state attorney, the one who brought the charges against the 6 officers, is a black female. And yet and still, they're still talking about systemic racism. The fact of the matter is a lot of black suspects are engaging in bad conduct, and the police are doing their job. And often the bad conduct is against another black victim.
Yeah. Does this all come down to education for you? Because at the end of the day, if you can teach people properly about history, and if you can teach them properly about what the role of government is and all of those things, that's really how you untie this stuff from just the screeching people on both sides.
I think so, but it's also all about rationally connecting the dots. Is it really true that that a young black man is more likely to be pulled over by a cop than a young white man? And if it is true, another question is why? And you cannot have a meaningful discussion about any of this without talking about behavior. I think maybe the last time we were here, we talked about a National Institutes of Justice study. That's the research arm of the DOJ. They did a study that came out in 2013 called Traffic Stops and Race. And it turns out that whether you're talking about driving without a license or driving while drunk or driving with a busted tailpipe or driving without a seatbelt or driving without a car seat in the back, it turns out black motorists were more likely to commit those crimes than a white motorist. And the study said that the differences in stopping have to do with differences in offending. If you can't have a meaningful discussion unless you have a meaningful discussion about behavior.
Right. Now, I suspect that some people on the left would hear that and they'd say, well, black people have been oppressed economically, so they are more likely to have a tail light out or some other thing. You would just say that's nonsense. You would just say that's individual responsibility. You got to drive a car that's supposed to be the one that's on the road.
Well, that's right. Also, there's more poor white people in the country than there are poor black people, but it's black people that complain about being disproportionately pulled over.
Yeah.
Half of all the homicides in this country involve black victims. Almost all of the black victims were killed by other black people. I don't know what that has to do with cops being racist. It has to do with the fact that a disproportionately large percentage of crime is committed by a small percentage of people, usually males, usually young black males, often against their peers. And that is because of the lack of fathers in the home. I didn't say it, Obama said it. A kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. The number one problem facing this country is not bad cops, not Obamacare. It is the large number of children raised without fathers. That is a product of the welfare state. Between 1890 and 1920, 1930, believe it or not, a black kid was slightly more likely to be born to mothers and fathers married to each other than a white kid.
So what's the connection there? What's the 1920 connection? So the welfare state starts, and why does that harm the black family more?
The welfare state really got kicked off in the mid-'60s. 25% of black kids were born outside of wedlock in 1960.
Yeah.
Right now it's 73%. And what happened is literally Lyndon Johnson launched a so-called war on poverty, and he sent workers literally knocking on people's doors to apprise women of their right to welfare, provided there was no man in the house. And so what we've done is change the culture. We've incentivized women to marry the government. We've allowed men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. It is a neutron bomb dropped on this country, all because of the war on poverty that was done by Lyndon Johnson and the Democrats, and with tacit support by Republicans as well.
Do you think the intentions were
one
good?
quick thing, and
Yeah.
we know that there is a negative incentive, because in 1996, when Bill Clinton signed the Welfare Reform Act of 1996, welfare declined by over 50%. Far steeper than anybody predicted. It turned out there was a bunch of able-bodied people and able-minded people sitting on couches, and when the jig was up, they got off the couch and got to work.
Yeah. Do you think the intentions are good? So when Lyndon Johnson pushes this, when the Democrats sign it, and the Republicans who got on board, were their intentions we're going to help people get out of poverty, or is there really something more nefarious going on?
No, the intentions were quite good. FDR talked about the corrosive effect of government dependency when he launched the New Deal, and Lyndon Johnson talked about getting people off of government dependencies and making them more self-sufficient by launching the war on poverty. Those were their stated goals, and I believe them. But human nature is such that if you allow somebody an easy out, some people will take an easy out. And that's what we've done with a lot of people.
So basically we've said to a certain subset of people, and it I guess is a disproportionately amount of black people, we've said you can get a certain amount of government handouts. And basically your argument is that this is now just leaving people in the status quo, because if you can get something, subsidized housing, whatever it is,
Right.
food stamps, and you don't have to do anything, you'll just take it. That's not a black characteristic. That's a characteristic of what any human might
Of
be.
human nature. And there was a poll taken in 1986 by the LA Times. They asked poor people and non-poor people a bunch of questions. And one of them was, do you believe that poor people have additional children to get additional money from welfare? The majority of non-poor people said no. They probably thought that was insulting, if not racist. 64% of poor people said yes. Also, they were asked this question, poor people were, do you believe that welfare is a crutch creates dependency, or do you believe it's a means to get you to stand on your own 2 feet and go forward? More of them said it was a crutch that created dependency than it was a means to get you on your own 2 feet and go forward. These are poor people responding to this poll.
Yeah. So basically, guilt has a lot to do with this. The guilt, sort of white liberal guilt, in a way, has actually subjected black people to not all black people, of course, but a certain subset of poorer black people to a set of circumstances that they almost can't get out of.
I think that's part of it, but also I think part of it is people that are comfortable and wealthy and well-educated look around to figure out how they can perfect the world. And they forget that part of getting anywhere is overcoming obstacles and struggling. And if you make things real comfortable for people, some people are going to take the easy way out. So I think it's a kind of mindset, the kind of mentality.
Yeah. When did we get to that point where fighting for what's yours, fighting that no one should give you anything, that the government isn't supposed to give you anything, and no one should, that it is your life to live, it's your job as a human to pursue what makes you happy and take what you can. That doesn't mean destroying everything around you, but finding what makes you happy. When did that get crossed up? Is it all connected to this, do you think?
That's a good question. I think the Founding Fathers intended for us to have what people have characterized as rugged individualism. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution set forth a handful of things that the federal government should do. They did not include Social Security, they did not include Medicare, they did not include Medicaid, they did not include charity. But we've gotten away from that. I think because as people become more and more affluent, they look around and try to perfect the world.
Yeah. Would you roll back all of those things?
I would.
know, do you consider yourself a libertarian?
I do.
You're basically a libertarian,
Yes.
right? So you would,
small L libertarian. I'm a law and order libertarian.
so you think there should be driver's licenses?
Of course.
Yeah, so you're not like, well, because it's an important distinction to make, because there are plenty of libertarians that don't. So what makes you not a classical liberal then? Because this has become one of the themes over the last year.
I am a classical liberal in the John Stuart Mill sense of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely I am. Somebody who believes in maximum personal freedom, but also you have to believe in maximum personal responsibility. And that is to deal with the consequences of your choices.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to shield people from the vestiges of the world, of life. And when you do that, you also will create some other kind of reaction that'll be worse. My father used to say, when you try and get something for nothing, you often end up getting nothing for something.
Yeah. So what sort of social safety net should there be then? Or do you not think that there should be? And this may be the difference between a small L libertarian and a classical liberal.
I think most classical liberals will feel the way I feel, and that is that the safety net should be provided by other individuals, not by government, but by churches, nonprofits. One of the things that Alexis de Tocqueville wrote about in Democracy in America were all of these what were called mutual aid societies that were set up. This is before Social Security, before Medicare, before Medicaid. And believe it or not, a black person living in Chicago in the 1920s and 1930s was more likely to have health care insurance than a white person because he joined these mutual aid societies that provided